Unlock correlational studies. Have you ever wondered if doing more exercise will lower our stress level? Let's find out using something called correlation studies. It helps us see if two things move together, like exercise and stress level. Correlation shows the relationship between two variables. It doesn't prove one causes the other, just that they are connected. Correlational study is a type of study that aims to identify the relationship and the level of relationship between two or more variables. Understanding the level of relationship between variables is very important because it allows researchers to develop findings in accordance with research objectives. Specifically, the objectives of correlational studies are first, seeking evidence of whether there is a relationship or correlation between variables, two, seeing the level of relationship between variables, and three, to obtain clarity and certainty whether the relationship is meaningful or insignificant. Some key characteristics of correlational study that researchers should be aware of include first, the variables being studied are relatively complex. They cannot be experimented with or manipulated. Second, measuring related variables simultaneously in realistic situations. Third, the correlation coefficient being sought is positive or negative, significant or insignificant. And fourth, one or more variables are called independent variables, and one or more variables are called dependent variables, according to Sudarwan 2002. There are three types of correlation. The first one, positive correlation, if both of the variables are increased. Second, negative correlations, if one of the variables goes up and the other variables goes down. And no correlations if the variables have no pattern. Let's say we gather data from 5 students about how many minutes they exercise daily and their stress level on a scale of 1 till 40. And we calculate R using Pearson's formula, and the result shows that R is negative 1. So the data have perfect negative correlation. Just because two things are related doesn't mean one causes the other. Correlation study is used in many areas. First, education, to know the relationship between study time and student grades. Second, in health, to know the relationship between sugar and energy. And third, in business, to know the relationship between advertisement and sales. But remember, correlation is different from causation. Just because they are related doesn't mean one causes the other. If we talk about correlational study in Islam, we are encouraged to observe the world and look for patterns in Allah's creation. Correlational study is one of the tools that help us reflect or tadabbur and understand the balance that Allah has placed in our life. Allah encouraged His servants to reflect on the relationships between natural phenomena, including the connection between human behavior, such as exercising, and mental well-being, such as stress level. This aligns with correlational study, which seeks to find relationships between variables through scientific observation. Level up and log t-test. Let's say two different teachers teach the same subject. One class scores better, but wait, is the difference real or just random? That's where t-test comes in. What is t-test? T-test is one of the most popular statistical techniques used to test whether mean difference between two groups is statistically significant. Null hypothesis state that both means are statistically equal, whereas alternative hypothesis state that both means are not statistically equal. There are three main types of t-test. The first one, independent t-test. The independent t-test is an inferential statistical test that determines whether there is a statistically significant difference between the means in two unrelated groups. Second, paired t-test. The paired sample t-test is used to determine whether the change in means between two paired observations is statistically significant. Third, one sample t-test. One sample t-test is a statistical procedure used to determine whether mean value of a sample is statistically same or different with mean value of its parent population from which sample was drawn. For example case, two groups of students, one studies with music, the other without music, and we want to know is the music group's better average real or just random luck? Step by step to answer the question. First, find the mean and standard deviation of each group. Second, use the t-test formula. Third, get your t-value. And fourth, compare it to the critical value or check the p-value. And let's say the result we find p-value is 0.01, which is less than 0.05 our alpha level. That means the difference is statistically significant, or studying with music actually helped for this group. In Islam, we are taught to judge fairly or adil, and t-test helps us to just that, comparing two groups with fairness and evidence to find out if the difference is real or just by chance. In a t-test, we use data and scientific methods to make fair and objective judgments, free from bias or assumptions, and this reflects the Islamic spirit of upholding justice based on fact and evidence. Level up, unlock analysis of variance or ANOVA. Ever wondered which study method worked best? Reading books? Watching YouTube? Flashcards? Let's find out using something powerful called analysis of variance or ANOVA. ANOVA is a statistical method to compare more than two group means. It tells us if at least one group is significantly different from the others. It's like t-test but for three or more groups. In ANOVA, the first gets a common p-value. A significant p-value of ANOVA test indicates for at least one pair between which the mean difference was statistically significant. And it is important that ANOVA is an omnibus test statistic. Its significant p-value indicates that there is at least one pair in which the mean difference is statistically significant. To determine the specific pairs, post hoc tests or multiple comparisons are used. There are two main types of ANOVA. First, one-way ANOVA. One-way ANOVA is extension of independent sample t-test. In independent sample t-test used to compare the means between two independent groups, whereas in one-way ANOVA means are compared among three or more independent groups. Second, two-way ANOVA. Two-way ANOVA is used to examine the effects of two or more independent variables on a dependent variable and also the interaction between those independent variables. For example, here we have three groups using different study techniques. Each group took the same test. The question is the difference in average scores real or just random? ANOVA breaks down total variation into two parts. First, between group variance or differences between the groups, within group variance, differences inside each group. Then, it calculates an F ratio. If F is large enough, the differences are statistically significant. From the data, we get f 6.5 and p-value 0.02. Since 0.02 is lower than 0.05, we reject the null hypothesis. That means, yes, at least one group performs differently. Looks like YouTube might be the winner here. Islam teaches us to appreciate diversity, judge fairly, and rely on evidence. ANOVA is a tool that helps us to analyze differences between multiple groups objectively to better understand the world Allah created with wisdom and balance. Level up, test bias, and differential item functioning. Imagine two students take the same test, same ability, same preparation, but one feels it was harder. Is the test unfair? That's where test bias and differential item functioning come in. What is test bias? Test bias happens when a test gives unfair advantage to one group. It doesn't measure ability equally. Test bias occurs when a test item or entire test causes students of similar abilities to perform differently because of their ethnic, cultural, religious, or gender differences. For a test to be valid, it must measure student achievement regardless of their different backgrounds. Because standardized tests have come to have long-range effect on students and school districts, it is important to be aware and avoid all forms of test bias so that standardized tests accurately measure achievement of all test takers. There are many types of testing bias, and a testing instrument only needs to have one be considered bias and therefore invalid. Among these types of possible test bias are cultural, socioeconomic, and gender bias, item bias, construct bias, sampling, language bias, and examiner bias. First, cultural, socioeconomic, and gender bias. Cultural, socioeconomic, and gender bias occurs when a test item favors one gender, cultural, or socioeconomic group over another. Use terms that may be derogatory toward a group or use terms that may be more familiar to one group than another. Second, item bias. Item bias occurs when a test item requires test takers to have secondary abilities, experiences, or knowledge to accurately respond to the test item. Third, construct bias. Construct bias occurs when a test is structured in a way that requires test takers to have secondary abilities, experiences, or knowledge for the task to accurately measure their achievement. Intelligent tests have come under scrutiny, with critics claiming that they do not measure the inherent aptitudes of minority population, but rather how well minorities share white, middle class values and knowledge. Fourth, sampling. Sampling becomes a potential hotbed when discussing test bias too. When subpopulations are sampled proportionally, the test will be biased against any minority populations, since by definition, minority populations are in the minority. But if minority populations are overrepresented on the testing instrument, the test may end up being biased against the majority population. Fifth, language. Language occurs when designated subgroups of interest within a population are not equally familiar with the task vocabulary or when the meaning of a word is not the same across subgroups. And the last is examiner bias. Examiner bias occurs if the examiner is not of the same culture or race as the students being tested. Some questions that can be asked that address test item fairness include: first, does the item give a positive representation of designated subgroups of interest? Second, is the test item material equally familiar to every designated subgroup of interest? And third, are designated subgroups of interest represented in relation to their presence in the general population being tested? Then, What is differential item functioning? Differential item functioning means that a specific item on the test favors one group over another, even when both have the same skill level. Differential item functioning occurs when items that are intended to measure a latent trait are unfair, favoring one group of individuals over another. For example, let's say there is a test item about football tactics. More boys get it right than girls, but if both groups are equally good in logic, that's differential item functioning. The item may rely on cultural familiarity, not just skill. In the context of assessment and testing, Islam requires that every form of evaluation be conducted fairly and without bias. A biased test goes against this principle because it fails to reflect true fairness in measuring a person's ability. Level up, unlock validity. Imagine taking a math test, but half the questions are about history. Is that even a math test? That's the power of validity and why it matters. What is validity? Validity refers to whether a task measures what it aims to measure. For example, a valid driving test should include a practical driving component and not just a theoretical test of the rules of driving. A valid language test for university entry, for example, should include tasks that are representative of at least some aspect of what actually happens in university settings, such as listening to lectures, giving presentations, engaging in tutorials, writing essays, and reading texts. Validity has different elements, which we are now going to look at in turn. First, task purpose. Why am I testing? We can never really say that a test is valid or not valid. Instead, we can say that a test is valid for a particular purpose. Second, test takers. Who am I testing? It is also vital to keep in mind who is taking your test. Third, test construct. What am I testing? Another key point is to consider what you want to test. Before designing a test, you need to identify the ability or skill that the test is designed to measure. In technical terms, the test construct. Some examples of constructs are intelligence, personality, anxiety, English language ability, and pronunciation. Fourth, task. How am I testing? Once you have defined what you want to test, you need to decide how you are going to test it. The focus here is on selecting the right test task for the ability you are interested in testing. And the last, test reliability. How am I scoring? It is important to consider how to score your test. A test needs to be reliable and to produce accurate scores. So, we need to make sure that the scores from a test reflects a learner's actual ability. Then, how to ensure validity? To make our test valid, we need to first define what we want to measure. Second, involve experts to review our tests or our content. And third, align questions with learning objectives. And fourth, run a small trial or pilot test. Example case, let's say you design an English test, but it's full of slang. Would that be valid for school English proficiency? Probably not. That would lower content and construct validity. Islam upholds truth and integrity in all forms of knowledge. Ensuring validity in measurement is a form of siddiq or truthfulness and amanah or responsibility. A valid test reflects the real concept being measured, just as Islam teaches us to represent truth accurately. And the last, unlock reliability. Let's say you write an essay and two teachers score it. If one gives you 80 and the other gives you 50, that's low internet reliability. But if both give 8, that's high reliability. Let's talk about reliability. What is reliability? Reliability refers to how consistently a method measures something. If the same result can be consistently achieved by using the same methods under the same circumstances, the measurement is considered reliable. For example, we measured the temperature of a liquid sample several times under identical conditions. The thermometer displayed the same temperature every time, so the results are reliable. Here are three common types of reliability. First, test retest reliability with same test, same person, but different times. Second, iterative reliability with two graders with same answer and also same score. Third, internal consistency. Do all items in a test measure the same thing? Then, how to make our test more reliable? First, we can use clear and objective questions. Two, train scores with rubrics. And third, pilot test and analyze item consistency. In Islamic perspective, the concept of reliability in research, defined as the consistency and trustworthiness of data, is closely aligned with core Islamic values such as sidq or truthfulness, amanah, trustworthiness, and istiqomah or consistency.